Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Happiness Journey with drdan podcast, where every journey is worth living. My name is Dr. Dan, and I'm your host for today's episode. I'm a bilingual neurolinguistic programming and cognitive behavior psychotherapist specializing in anger management issues, both court-appointed and private, marriage counseling using the EFT method, dissociative disorders, narcissistic personality disorders, depression, anxiety, dream analysis, and also provide life, business, and retirement coaching support. I provide individual one-on-one session in both French or English, and also do group settings. If you need any assistance, reach out to DMV Therapy and Coaching Services at 301-325-1550, and our website can be found on lifecoach.drdanamzallag.com. Today, I'm very excited to have for our second episode of season 23, a very special guest and mindset coach, Becky Upchurch. And just like every of my past episode, I will leave it up to the guests to properly introduce themselves, as no one can do a better job. Becky, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be able to be with you and have this conversation. As you said, I'm a mindset coach. And so what I actually focus on, because obviously mindset is a very broad area. So my current focus is helping busy women create time for themselves and their goals and the things that light them up in life by learning how to say no to the things that don't serve them without feeling guilty, without being afraid, and without worrying about what other people think. My kind of approach to life and change and growth and all of the good things that I think make life worth living is that in order to achieve the things we want to achieve, in order to build the lives we want to build, we need to find simple, practical, easy to implement ways to help us grow and change and move forward. And so that is the focus of what I do. And I believe that a huge part of that is also mindset and trusting in your ability to create the kind of sustainable change that you want to see in your life.
So, first of all, thank you so much for being here today, Becky, and I really appreciate your time. Now, do you feel that if everyone changes their mindset to be able to get to where they want in life, would that guarantee them happiness?
So I think that that's a really great question. And I think it brings us kind of to a larger question of what is happiness? And I am a mindset coach, and I do believe that mindset is so relevant. But one of the things that I take great pride in is I am not somebody who falls under that category of quote unquote being toxically positive. And what I mean by that is I actually had someone say to me once, you know what I really like about you is you're a coach, but you're not one of those coaches who's just like, la, 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 everything is sunshine and rainbows. They said, you acknowledge that life is hard. You acknowledge that things are challenging. And then you're like, okay, so what are we going to do about it? And how are we going to try to create a great life in spite of it? So can we still find ways to be happy? Absolutely. Does happiness mean that life is not going to ever give us struggle or challenges or sadness? No. So I think it's really about finding a balance, but also recognizing that we can choose how we want to show up in the world for ourselves, for other people, and how we want to show up in situations and how we want to carry ourselves through them.
So now I'm going to ask you a question regarding the famous book, The Secret, with Rhonda Byrne, about the laws of attraction, thought become things. So if you feel that there's not, I mean, obviously there's a lot of things in between the thoughts and in between things, which usually are action and belief. So do you feel that those laws of attraction are erroneous, that they mean that they're not really being too, or they're being too like overly toxically positive? Because again, is there something in between where people can acknowledge that there are some negative things in the world, but also if they put their thoughts and action and belief, they will accomplish greatness?
Yes, and so there's this kind of a model or a framework in the coaching world that your audience may or may not be familiar with. So I'm going to try to very quickly, just rudimentarily explain it. And it's the idea that something happens. So a circumstance, a situation happens, and it's a neutral occurrence. It's just a fact. You know, I lost my job. I had a car accident. I broke my foot, whatever the thing is. You know, I got a raise. It could be good or bad. And then we have a thought about that thing. And depending on what that thought is, it causes a feeling.
Okay.
And then our feelings are what drive our choices, our actions, what we choose to do and not do. And then those choices and those actions are what creates the reality that we are living inside of. So I think it's a little bit more complicated than just saying, oh, we can simply just attract things. Yes, I think there's a lot of power in the mind, but I think there's kind of understanding how it works. So if I look at my life and I think, I want all of these things and I'm not getting them, it's not just about, well, let me pick a random mantra and practice it until it happens. It's about, okay, well, if I'm not getting a result, let's say I want to get a promotion at work and I really want to get a promotion. And every day I'm like, today's the day I'm going to get promoted. And then it just isn't happening. Well, let me look at, okay, if I know that the outcome I want is to get a promotion, how can I kind of backwards hack the system and shape my thinking to think thoughts that give me feelings that maybe drive me to take certain actions, right? If I know that in order to get a promotion, I need to show up a certain way, or I need to do certain tasks, or I need to build certain relationships, but I'm secretly thinking it's too hard. It's too hard to get recognized, or that person will never see my value. Well, then I'm not showing up to cultivate those relationships and do those things to create the result I want. So really kind of understanding how that whole trajectory of the model works, and then using that to our advantage to help create change.
So would you say then, if I could summarize what you just said, is basically reverse engineers the laws of attraction?
Yeah, I guess that is kind of another way of saying it.
Okay, so basically they have to start focusing on the things they want and then adapt the thoughts behind it. So do we go backwards?
You absolutely can go backwards. I feel like you can use it in either direction. So using it in a forward way, it might be, let's say I'm stuck in an area of my life. Maybe it's, oh, I really want to, get into this running habit because I want to run a marathon. But every day I'm coming up with excuses, or maybe I'm going running one day a week now and, one day a week later, and not really making it a habit. And I can't figure out why, because it's like, well, I really want to run this marathon. And then my brain knows that in order to get there, I need to do these things. So why am I not doing them? Well, to solve that problem, I can use kind of the framework to dig into my thinking. Okay, well, where's the thinking showing up that's getting me stuck, that's causing me to not take the action I want to take, or that's causing me to sabotage? So we can work it that way. Or I can look at, oh, I have this goal, how do I shape my thinking to help support me to take action toward that goal?
Okay, so in your practice of mindset coaching, Becky, what are the most common problems that you see in women that they do not achieve the goal that they set themselves to achieve because of whatever obstacle they create from within? Because obviously, like fear is an illusion. Most of them agree to, and it's constructed by your own mind. So do you think that because people don't have a high self-esteem, that they don't allow themselves to change their mindset?
Ability. I will tell you, one of the things that I think is really challenging specifically for women, and actually one of the reasons that I've kind of shifted into the area of focus that I have more recently, in which is the area of boundaries and saying no, is because I think a lot of women, if you were to kind of ask them, why haven't you achieved this thing you want to achieve, or why aren't you doing this thing that you want to be doing, or why are these things not happening? A lot of them would say that it comes down to time. I only have so many hours in the day, and I'm trying to be good at my job, be a good partner, be a good parent, be a good friend, be a good child, sibling, whatever roles they carry. And there's only so many hours in a day, and I run out of time. And I think that that is a legitimate claim and a legitimate concern. So I want to start by saying I'm not minimizing that, because I think most of us have jam-packed schedules, and I think women especially can fall into that category. And I would argue that the internal piece that you mentioned, kind of like, okay, what's going on inside that's getting in the way, is many of us in general, but I would argue specifically women, have something internally that tells us that we should devote our time to the needs of others. And so it's the inability to say no to being everything for everyone that causes that time problem. Right? Because if I get comfortable saying, no, I'm sorry, I can't do that for you. No, I'm sorry, I can't stay late at work. No, I'm sorry, I can't volunteer at the school every week. No, I'm sorry, I can't do this thing or that thing. we would find that we can actually free up a lot of time in our day. But what it comes down to is we have this learned sense of what it means to be a good fill in the blank, good daughter, good partner, good mother, good friend, good sister. And so we are socialized from a very, very young age as women that you should be a good person, you should be a good girl, you should be agreeable, and that people who say no are difficult, or that women can either be nice and agreeable, or they can be bad people, not nice people. And so we're set up with this dichotomy of, oh, if you're the person who says no all the time, it's like, oh, well, that lady's a, insert whatever, negative term, people use. And so a lot of us have internalized that it's like, oh, if I want to be liked, if I want to get along, if I want to be part of community, if I want people to, want me in their circles, I need to be agreeable.
That's what.
And that's kind of that internal piece is one of the biggest challenges that creates that block.
So those who are seeking external validation from others to be accepted, to be wanted, to be needed, whatever it is, so how can they change their mindset to still accept, to say no to others for certain things or for certain boundaries that has been crossed? Because if it's always about pleasing others and being accepted, then if you're telling them that it's okay to say no, then that basically is counterintuitive to what they're trying to accomplish. So how can they find a balance between both?
Yes, it is very counterintuitive to what many of us believe and what many of us were taught. And so the first thing to understand is it's not something that can just be immediately changed. Like I can't just say to you, okay, well, it doesn't make you a bad person to say no, and suddenly, light bulb goes off and everything changes. We really have to be mindful about putting it in practice in a couple ways. The first way is the mindset piece. So looking specifically at what mindsets are you specifically carrying? Because it might be a general mindset like, oh, it's unkind to say no, or people will get mad if I say no. But it might also be something very specific that you carry from something that happened when you were younger or an experience you had with a friend. And so there may be some quote unquote baggage that we carry that we need to dig into and figure out, okay, well, let's really unpack this and let's really talk about what we're seeing here. And let's take these thoughts and think about how can we shift them in a more positive, more fruitful direction. The other piece of it is also those practical strategies, because I need to get into the mindset to say no. But if I'm somebody who's never said no before and I try to go and say no to somebody, it's going to be really challenging. It's going to feel really hard. I'm going to not know what to say. I think a lot of people have had the experience either themselves or to be on the receiving end of asking somebody to do something or being asked to do something. And the response is, oh, I'm sorry, I can't. And it's followed by several minutes of apology and explanation. And again, that's a learned habit that's so common to so many of us. But to recognize that, hey, that's not how we have to respond. And, there's 5 other ways that I could respond to this that are just as appropriate. Let's practice them. Let's pick one that works. Let's start flexing that muscle. And I love to use the analogy of a muscle because I think this is so true in any kind of change, any kind of learning and growth. It doesn't happen overnight. And it's like when you're working out, if you've never worked out before, that muscle grows over time, right? You don't lift weights once and suddenly you're Popeye the Sailor Man. It's you need that, you need that growth over time. And so helping people recognize that the more you practice, the more you have the skills to say no, and you have different ways that you can say no in different contexts, and you have the permission to say no. And you start to see the impact of saying no, and you start to recognize that a lot of the things that you fear, like you said, fear is in our own mind. It's not real. Once you start seeing that, oh, I had this fear that if I say no to things, my boss isn't going to think I'm valuable anymore. And I start seeing that, oh no, you know what? I'm still seen as a really valued team member, even though I said no to 3 things in the last 2 weeks. That helps people also to shift into that different mindset once they realize that a lot of those fears are not founded in reality.
But then again, the fact of saying no is very circumstantial due to the fact that if we take the example of you working for a company and the economy is really, really bad and people are afraid to losing their job, they have to say yes to everything that the employer is asking because of the fear of saying, oh, if you're not accepting, hasta la vista, baby. So then they go home, they're angry about doing stupid tasks or medial tasks, and they go home and they say no to everyone that they love. So they basically push away the people that are important in their life to be able to leave way for those who are just taking advantage. So if we're practicing this muscle that you just said, it's very, very hard that on one side of the day, you have to abide by certain rules and regulation and accept doing whatever is being told to do. But then you go home and you have to really practice the other muscle that says no.
And it's interesting that you say that, because I actually encourage people to start in one specific area. And the reason for this is I find in my own, experience, trying to do everything at once is very hard, and it becomes very overwhelming, and it can make it very easy to kind of throw up my hands and be like, I can't do this, it's too hard. So I actually encourage people, if saying no is something that you really struggle with, it's really uncomfortable, you just, you're very new to it, and you need to really start building that muscle from the beginning, I encourage people to think about, okay, what is one area or one person that I can start with that's kind of low-hanging fruit? And I always give the example, because I think this is a good example for most, not all people. I would not, for most people, depending on their situation, suggest that they start by saying no to their mother.
Okay.
Right? Because that's one where that's somebody that we're pretty emotionally invested in. We've, been with them our whole lives, theoretically. And so that's going to be a harder kind of hill to climb, so to speak. So maybe I'm going to start saying no to, that other parent that I know from the school who's always in charge of fundraisers and is always hitting me up to volunteer. Maybe I'm going to start by saying no to some things with her first, because I'm not as emotionally invested in her. And so my fear is not going to be as intense, because even though ultimately I don't think either of those people are going to reject you, if this person that you know very tangentially decides that they don't like you because you say no, that's very different from, oh, no, my mother won't speak to me anymore. So encouraging people to kind of start with something that feels a little bit easier to, again, start flexing that muscle. So it might be, I'm going to start saying no. You know what? At work, you're right. Things are super busy. I want to make sure I'm making a good impression. And I also don't want to work late every night because I want to have time for my family. So maybe I'm going to, approach it from the perspective of, I'm going to give 110% when I'm there. But you know what? On Wednesday nights, I can't stay late because I have a family obligation. And so maybe that's what I'm going to practice saying no to. But I'm going to offset it by making sure that my value is seen in other ways, right? And so again, starting with that kind of small scale, and then over time, building it out to being able to say no to more things and in more situations, and building that comfort over time until it just becomes part of who you are.
So do you think it's also a good advice to be able to tell people to transition from a maybe to a complete no, which means that the person who asks something, we tell them, well, you know what, let me think about it because right now my schedule is very busy, but I'll get back to you on that. And then the next time
Yeah.
you could say, you know what, because of my schedule being so busy, unfortunately, the time is not available.
Absolutely. And that's why, I think it's important that people, again, goes back to kind of what are your individual thoughts around things, where are people's individual entry points and comfort levels? Because for some people, yeah, it may feel better to say, you know what, I'm not ready to just lead with no, but like if I could practice a maybe, and then how do we turn that maybe into a no? Or, hey, I'm not ready to just say no, thank you, and end the conversation. I still feel like I need to give an explanation. Let me practice some kind of more general phrasing as opposed to 5 minutes of story. So finding those baby steps to increase the comfort, because that's the thing that I think is important also to recognize with any kind of change. And I think, the mindsets around growth, it's change is not comfortable, right? It doesn't feel good. Even when we're changing in positive ways, it can feel terrible. And I think sometimes people expect like, oh, I'm changing and I'm growing in a way that I really want to grow, so it's going to feel good. And I know one of my coaches once said something. She's like, I just go into it knowing this is going to feel terrible, but it's what I'm signing up for to achieve this big goal that I want to achieve. So when it comes up and it feels terrible, instead of freaking out and lamenting it, I'm just going to be like, yeah, this is the part that feels terrible. because change is hard and I'm going to manage my mind around it and I'm going to move forward. So recognizing that it doesn't always have to feel terrible. I don't want people to think that, but it's not always, again, it's not always sunshine and rainbows and lollipops and all the good things, or else we'd all be changing all the time in massive ways and, running around with smiles on our faces.
That's so true. Now, for everyone who's listening, I'm sure they must be wondering, when you change an old habit for a new one, it takes between 35 to 55 days to continuously adopt a new habit to be able to see the changes. So for a mindset change, Becky, how long does it take to completely change your mindset? So people have some sort of an idea. Am I talking about 100 days? Am I talking about a whole year? Am I talking about a decade? What is exactly the time limit? Or not limit, but more of a time structure.
Okay, so I'm going to say something that people are going to initially hear and not like, but stick with me because I want to get all the way through it. Sometimes what you mean by, it's the mindset's going to change. Sometimes there are mindsets that you will have forever. And what I mean by that isn't, oh, you can't make changes. But I think sometimes we think, oh, I'm going to make this change. And then once it quote unquote sticks, nothing's ever going to come back up, or I'm never going to move backwards. And that's an interesting thing I find with mindset is even when you've done work to change a mindset, sometimes that old thinking can pop up, especially in a certain context or a certain situation or when you're stressed out. And I like to give the example of, I've done a lot of work around body image. I was chubby from the time I was very small throughout my entire life, gained weight. And so I struggled a lot with weight and my body image around it. I have done a lot of work around my body image. And, I joke all the time, if you had told me 10 years ago that I would have some of the thoughts I have about my body or say some of the things or feel comfortable the way I do, I would have told you were crazy. So I feel like I have made significant progress. But that doesn't mean that there aren't days when those old thoughts just will randomly pop up, or something happens and my brain likes to default to an old thought that doesn't serve me. Because realistically, if I've been thinking these thoughts for 40 plus years, maybe I've been thinking new ones for a year, but still, if you think about the ratio there, it's not unheard of. And I think that it's important to know that because I don't want people to think like, oh, if an old mindset comes out, it means I'm broken or things aren't working. Because the key is not that thoughts that aren't helpful aren't going to pop up. It's what do we do with them when they pop up, right? So if I'm practicing saying no, if I'm practicing letting go of that fear and believing that it's okay to say no, there may still be times where somebody asks me to do something and I feel bad about it. But instead of wallowing in the feeling bad, I'm going to default to my new way of thinking. I'm going to remind myself, actually, no, it is okay to say no. I don't need to keep that old thought. It doesn't serve me. Here's the new thought I want to remind myself of instead.
So when they resurface, do you have to just acknowledge the old thought or the old mindset, accept it, and then just get rid of it? Or is it going to come back over and over for the rest of your life? Or is it eventually going to diminish?
I think it really can depend on the person and the context. I think when something comes up that isn't helpful, especially if it's an old thought that I've worked on, again, that acknowledgement of like, oh yeah, I'm not going to freak out about that thought. I know that it's popping up because I thought it for 10 years. But you know what? I don't need to think it anymore. And that's why I think it's so important to understand kind of how to change your thoughts and to proactively work on new thoughts. So as I'm kind of helping myself grow, not only do I dig into the thoughts that aren't serving me, but I want to practice on purpose thoughts that do over and over and over so that those start to become second nature. And that's a really good tool to use when those old thoughts pop up. It can be like, oh, that's that old silly thought that I used to think. Let me grab that much better new thought and remind myself of that.
So before we conclude, can you just give a quick like 2 or 3 tips for people to start adapting a new mindset change?
Yes. So number one, I would say you really need to figure out what your current thoughts are. And that may sound silly for some people, but I would argue that most of us are aware of some of our thoughts, but not all of them. My theory is that we have thoughts that exist on a surface level that are in our awareness, and then we have thoughts that are a little bit deeper down that we might not be aware of. And so an exercise that I love, that I recommend to everybody, especially if you're struggling in an area, maybe you're feeling stuck towards a goal, or maybe you're struggling with self-esteem or body image or whatever it may be, is to do a brain dump. And you write whatever the topic is on the top of the paper. So let's go back to that running example. Let's say I want to become a runner and I'm not going running. So I might just write running at the top of the page. And then I'm going to start bulleting every single thought that comes to mind when I think about running. So it might be things like, I'm not a fast runner, I'm too slow, running is hard. And usually when I do this, the first few thoughts, first minute I'm doing it, it's stuff that I'm pretty aware of. Like, yes, I'm a slow runner. Okay, that's not surprising. That's, I see these thoughts and none of it surprises me. And then I keep going. And eventually I get to at least one thought that makes me go, oh, where'd that come from? So maybe I'm writing my random thoughts. And then one of my thoughts is fat people can't run. And I go, oh, wait, what? I didn't know that was in my brain. And I can start to examine it. So I say number one tip is really, and again, especially if you're stuck or you're struggling, figure out what are some of those hidden under the surface thoughts that your brain might be believing that you are not aware of. Because until you bring them to your awareness, it's really hard to change them or steer yourself away from them. That is number one. Number two, create a mindset routine, but make sure it works for you. I know a lot of people, and I was once one of them, that adopt mindset routines, morning routines, whatever it is, because they hear about somebody else's and they think it's what they should do, or it sounds good, but it doesn't actually resonate with them. And so they're doing something that is not helpful. And I'll give an example. I'm a writer. I've written my whole life. And so journaling is a huge part of my daily routine. I try to journal every single morning, barring something, happening. And I've had conversations with people where I've talked about, journaling. And I had somebody say, I love the idea of journaling, but I just don't like sitting down to write. Like, it just doesn't feel like me. And so I say to them, do you have a voice memo app on your phone? Just turn that on and talk to yourself. It's the same thing. It's just verbal journaling. If that feels better for you, find a way that works for you. Because I do think it's important to spend time on your mindset and to cultivate a mindset routine. But I also think that it is important to do it in a way that works. And then I would say my third tip that I would like to leave folks with is the idea that if you are listening to this and you are somebody who is thinking change is too hard or change is not possible, I would encourage you to lean into two things. Number one, change is always possible, even when it feels like it's not. And the best way to make change easier on yourself, to make change actually happen, is to make it as easy as possible. So if you want to create change and it feels like change is hard, you need to figure out the smallest baby step that you can take. And your brain's going to tell you it's not enough. You're going to be like, oh, that's not going to make a difference. I'm not even going to bother. But it's in those tiny, tiny choices and those tiny, tiny actions where big change gets rooted. And over time, those are the things that become sustainable. It's not the giant leaps that we then give up on because we get exhausted. It's the small choices over time that are what build change and what build a life. So it's okay to go small. You don't have to go big or go home. Go small and stay in the game.
So where can people find you before we conclude?
I am on Instagram at Becky Upchurch _. I am on Facebook at Higher Good Coaching, and that's higher with a GH. And then folks can always reach out to me via email, and that's just Becky at highergoodcoaching.com. And again, that's higher with a GH, like higher power.
Beautiful. Well, Becky, on that note, that is all the time that we have for today's podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us. And thank you again for participating and inspiring our many listeners with your incredible knowledge. Now, we hope that you've all enjoyed today's episode. And I'm so very excited about the many upcoming guests that we have scheduled for season 23 of the Happiness Journey podcast, filled with inspirational stories just like the one that you listened today. Now, here are some concluding words of wisdom. A positive mindset is the foundation of a happy life. Embrace gratitude and focus on the good in every situation. Challenges are opportunities for growth, and setbacks are just stepping stones to success. Cultivate self-compassion and be kind to yourself in every circumstances. Surround yourself with positive influences and uplifting energy. Remember, happiness comes from within, and your mindset shapes your reality. Choose to see the world through a lens of optimism and possibility. Every day is a chance to create joy and find fulfillment in life's simple pleasure. My name is Dr. Dan Amzallag, and you may all keep pursuing your amazing journey in life.